Hey everyone, it's Heidi here from Future Green. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday evening. And Val and I will be here today to take you through in the next hour a little bit about what we do here around food sustainability, giving you a kind of a 101, and then also talking a little bit about what you can do about the challenges that we're seeing in the food system and really thinking about, well, how does that translate into business? So hopefully you're here to learn a little bit about food sustainability and the food system, but also some solutions that we can support you with as well. All right, then let's jump straight in. For those of you who don't know us, I want to give you a quick history. We're based in Hong Kong, and in the last 4 to 5 years, we have been auditing restaurants through the Food Made Good program, and that was out of the UK's SRA, the Sustainable Restaurant Association. In 2020, we ran the awards, and we did that for 3 years, and also ran our consultancy projects. We're very excited to get our B Corp. For those of you who don't know what B Corp is, it's very much a purpose, the stamp for purpose-led businesses. And today we've rebranded and we're Future Green, and we really focus our work on supporting those food and drink businesses on moving the needle on sustainability, whether they have a food strategy or not. We can help them build that, or also run some initiatives that they've identified that they want to move forward on. So lots of strategy, lots of workshopping, lots of training. And who have we done this kind of work with? So in Hong Kong, we've worked for about 4 or 5 years with food service, with food retail, food manufacturers, and quite often they're through landlords because they want to engage their F&B tenants, or with caterers who are also engaging their own clients, whether that be banks or schools, and then the big retail groups as well. So yeah, we really want to make sustainability interesting and engaging and fun. So it can be a little bit of a dry academic subject when you do it properly. And the idea is that we help businesses understand the issues in a way that isn't too taxing. So here are some pictures from us doing workshops. And sometimes we do this on location in farms to sort of bring it to life a little bit. And we've been working with landlords and drinks companies over the last few years. And yeah, anybody who works with food and drink, either directly or indirectly, we can absolutely be supporting them. Here are some events we ran this year, and you can see bottom right there, we worked with Illy. He was doing a little surprise visit on tea ceremony, and that was quite nice because our attendees were interested in doing something a little bit different, but we surprised them on that day. And also the tools are really fantastic now for running workshops online to find solutions around sustainability online. So we do a lot through fantastic workshopping tools like Miro. And I think it's important when we talk about sustainability, especially in the food space, that we align to some kind of agreed metric or agreed framework. And we do that. So the Omni Action framework out of the UK has a backing by over 600 organizations, not just NGOs, but also businesses, consultants, international institutions, and the United Nations. And that's important because if we have an alignment around what we mean by food sustainability, we can all start moving in the same direction. So this is a really important framework that we consider the gold standard when we talk about food sustainability. We also have our own framework which breaks down. So for those of you who work in ESG, you'll be familiar with environment and society. In our work, we also look deeply into the challenges around sourcing and how you procure your food. So most businesses here, we're in very early stages, are interested in the topics around less and better meat, local and seasonal. And they might not really be thinking about kind of the more upstream issues like healthy soils and biodiversity. But what we try to do is help businesses here look through the lens of the system so that they don't inadvertently, sort of have these trade-offs and negative consequences or unintended consequences when they create solutions for their customers. And of course, we align to the SDGs, all 17 goals as well. I thought before we go any further, because I'm doing a lot of talking here, it'd be really great just to understand a little bit more from you in the audience. What does, do you have a sustainability strategy? So that's a very quick question. And the second one is a bit more around, what does sustainability mean to you? because it does mean different things for different businesses. So why don't you grab your phone and take a picture of the QR code and let us know on the first question if you already have a sustainability strategy for your food business or not. And I think I'm going to let Val share the results, who's with me here today. Give you a few minutes to answer that question. So do we have any answers coming through yet, Val? Do you want to share? Do I need to stop my screen for you to share yours, Val? You're going to switch it over? Okay, cool. Do you want to share those results since I can't see those? Okay, so out of the few that we're seeing, it seems like the majority of you have a sustainability strategy. That's good. Any more to answer that one? It also helps us to know where you are in your journey. If you have a strategy already, that's fantastic. It means that if you implement any work going forward, you'll be aligning, hopefully, to that strategy that exists today. And if you haven't, then it's a really great opportunity to start thinking about where to begin on that and identifying those kind of material issues that are important to you. Okay, so we're going to move to the next question, which is, what does sustainability mean to you? And this is just a word cloud, so you can there's no wrong or right answer. You can throw in a couple of words there to let us know what it means to you. So perhaps if you're a steakhouse, you might be thinking more along the lines of high welfare meat. If you are a seafood restaurant, it might be a little bit more around traceability and transparency of the fish that you serve. And if you're a vegetarian restaurant, it might be challenges around making sure that you can source local and seasonal vegetables. It could be anything really, but it'd be good to get a sense from you where you're leaning in terms of what sustainability means to you. Oh, that's right. I'm going to give you a minute. We found that because our audiences are from different places around the world, dialing in from lots of different places, that there's sometimes a little lag. So let's give you guys a few minutes to answer that question. Also, if your camera isn't working on your phone, you can absolutely just use your browser and type in menti.com and put in that number 75155657. Oh, fantastic. Val, do you want to share the answers?
Exploiting opportunities, thoughtful resilience, provenance, culture, future, mitigating risk, and new business operating modes.
I like that. So they're quite broad and varied. We've got resilience. So we're quite familiar with the idea that sustainability is about long-term planning and the long game. That's great. Provenance, which of course really important to understand more about where our ingredients are from, how far they've traveled, and what regions of particular areas. Mitigating risk. I think risk is, of course, important, but once we get into sustainability and start our journey, we encourage businesses to think more about regenerative agriculture, regenerative systems, and moving away from just minimizing risk to, having a positive, net positive impact as well. Okay, so, and accountability. Yeah, fantastic. Of course, ESG reporting is compulsory for a lot of large businesses today, and there will be accountability there for sure. Hopefully, we will move away from this kind of having to do it to a space where we want to make those changes and still be profitable as well. So thanks for sharing your ideas. Okay, so let's just very quickly look at who you are. So I would imagine you're here because you're new to food sustainability, you just want to get a sense of what it's all about, or perhaps you're already working in sustainability on your food business and you're just kind of looking for an alternative to the current status quo or whatever you're doing, and you're looking for a way to improve what you're doing, or perhaps what you're doing isn't quite working. So the goal of today is to really show you a faster way to align your teams around potentially designing a food vision or a food initiative, so that you can get that clarity that you need among your teams. Because quite often sustainability teams are working in silos, and that's never a good idea. And I can show you a reason later on through one of our examples. So you want to align your teams, your leadership teams, and your everyday teams on what your food strategy is, so that internally and externally you can be very clear on what you mean and what you stand for. So your stakeholders could be your employees, it could be your suppliers, and then externally, of course, it's your customers. And we'll also share with you a tool that we think is a brilliant way to help you design your food vision. And it really is a myth that it's complex and time consuming, because as long as you've got the right people in the room, you can come up with a plan very quickly. And we'll show you how we do that through something called the Sprint, the Food Sustainability Sprint. And it's a framework that helps you to achieve and to action on those focus areas that you come up with. And just to give you a sense of our approach, how we run these workshops, we do draw from the design sprint. So some of you in the design space or service design space might be aware of this one by Jake Knapp from Google Ventures. We also draw from AJ Smart. So a lot of these materials are from that kind of thinking. And of course, food system sustainability, where we get our subject matter expertise, is from the Centre for Food Policy in London, where I am an alumni. So before we go any further, I might just add, just sort of like really clarify what do we mean by the food system, because once I was doing a webinar and we got to the very end and somebody asked me, what is the food system? So I want to be really sure that I'm clear here and I'm not just throwing out lots of jargon. And please, as we go through this webinar, I'd love to get your questions, so just put them in the chat, and Luke, who is supporting us on the tech, will just pass them through to us on the system. So I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along, because we are in a relatively new space for a lot of people. So what do we mean by the food system? Here's the definition from the Centre for Food Policy. The food system is the interconnected system of everything and everybody that influences and is influenced by the activities involved in bringing food from farm to fork and beyond. So if you look at the lovely diagram on the left there, you can see there's lots of levels, and it's about the people, but it's also about the activities along that food chain. So for example, if we're looking at health, it could be the questions that surround why we have why we're using so much of the antibiotics in our food system, the routine use of antibiotics, and how that's affecting our human health because of the way we farm in conventional farming today. It could be environmental issues, the questions around how we use our natural resources in our supply chain, in our restaurants or in our supermarkets. Society could be the questions around why we are feeding our children and everyone so much junk food. Why is the pricing there to sort of support cheaper food? What's going on with those subsidies? And how can we support healthier lifestyles in terms of the way we consume food? Or economy, that's really about pricing and subsidies and workers. So lots of different levels. Oh, and politics as well, one I nearly missed, really important. Lots of regulatory risk challenges coming up for sustainability that businesses need to be aware of. So there's a lot going on there in the food system. And I think for businesses that serve food, sell food indirectly or directly, will need to be aware of what's happening in the food system. So, and I also wanted to really clarify that this is a serious issue when you talk about climate change, when you talk about human health, all of the environmental issues. The food system really plays such a major role in terms of being a driver of environmental degradation. And it's not just problems that we're seeing on the environmental side, it's also on the human health side. So I'll describe a little bit about what I mean there. So This is really for context, and I know it's quite high level, but we will go into kind of some detail on what you can do about this later on. But to give the context on why we need to address the challenges we face in the food system, it's always good to set the scene. And I think this kind of does it quite well. So currently today, globally, 1 in 10 are going hungry, whilst 3 in 5 are considered overweight or obese. So that sort of shows you that our food system isn't working for everyone, and there's a real imbalance there in the way our food system is working. Also, probably many of you know that about a third of our food is lost or wasted, and it's lost in those developing countries where you have challenges around storage and processing, and then a lot of the food is wasted in the sort of richer countries. And actually, if you were following the Earthshot Prize this week or last week, you'll see one of the winners were a company in India where they were able to design a food storage sort of a device very simple that takes its energy from the sun. So that was very exciting to see. If food waste were a country, you might have seen this stat as well, 8% greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the third highest. So before that, America and China. So if food waste were a country, it would represent 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. So really big challenges there for food waste. It's really something that we believe businesses can address and should address, because it's actually a win-win. You know, you save money on your bottom line, but you also reduce food to landfill, waste to landfill. And then there's this thing called NCDs, non-communicable diseases. So these are the diseases that we bring upon ourselves through the food we eat, alcohol we consume, smoking, and those are responsible for about 71% of deaths. So, you know, we really need to consider what it is that we're consuming. And this one is related to monocropping and the way we focus so much in the conventional farming space on yields and on calories. So 77% of the world's soy is grown to feed animals. When you look at that stat against the first one, so many people going hungry, it's a little bit challenging to look at those together, but it's true. So much of our grains are grown to feed animals, and in a monocropped way as well. We also only eat about 200 of the 300,000 edible species. Again, it's linked to a big focus on yields and calories rather than biodiversity and diversity of the foods that we eat. Antibiotic resistance is on the rise. I think I mentioned that earlier on in my example of what is the food system. So this is simply because we are using way too much antibiotics in our food system and our farming systems on a routine basis rather than a needs basis. So that is also very challenging. And 70% of our fresh water is used up for food production. Given our challenges around drought and weather patterns, that's going to be more and more of an issue. And if you only remember one stat from what I've presented here, it's really that about a third of the greenhouse gases from the food system come from 30% come from the food system, about half of that is from the livestock sector. So really you can see that just from that single slide, there's a lot going on in terms of the food system and why we need to address it in the way we procure our food and run our businesses. All right, so yeah, feel free to jump in with questions. I'm going to answer them as I go, just to break it up a little bit, because this information can get quite dense, and I'm happy to make it sort of be a bit more spontaneous with your questions. So please put them in. So I think I'll just run you through a little bit on procurement, and then my colleague will talk a little bit about some environmental challenges. These are only 3 of those 15 areas of our framework. So I'm just going to touch on these very on a high level to give you a sense of what some of the procurement issues are that we're facing today. So I already mentioned a little bit about biodiversity. The reason why it's so critical is that we need animals to pollinate. So about of 115 major crops, 87 of them rely on animal pollination. And how can we have our food how can we have pollination if we are cutting down forests and losing so many of our species? So it's really thinking about the big picture So important to consider that. And here's a stat for you. Pollinators are crucial. 1 in every 3 bites of food on the planet is thanks to them. So that's a nice one to remember, I think. Thinking about biodiversity and the importance of maintaining species diversity. So in terms of how that links back to food, it's very much about intensive farming. We're cutting down our forests to convert land for farming crops. So lots of negative consequences there, not just in terms of the soil, but air quality and how we use our water. So really important to think about that. And then in terms of the things that we can do, if you're a consumer, you can be looking out for standards such as the Rainforest Alliance, little frog there. Or if you're a chef, you might want to look into this really fantastic guide by Future 50 Foods, Knorr WWF. If you're a farmer, you might want to think about perennial crops. So those are the crops that stay good throughout winter and they don't require us to till the soil. So in terms of farming, it's actually healthier for the soils or easier on the soils, let's say. So I'm going to just share a quick video because even McDonald's in Hong Kong are selling Rainforest Alliance coffee. So I think that's great. And this was a little clip I saw a couple of months ago on LinkedIn of this girl talking about coffee. So let's take a look. I hope you can hear it.
If you're a fan of McCafe coffee, listen up. McCafe coffee is delicious, sustainably sourced, benefits farming communities, and supports a deforestation-free supply chain. To achieve all this, McDonald's purchases coffee that is certified to international sustainability standards from organizations like Rainforest Alliance. We also established our McCafe Sustainability Improvement Platform, or SIP, partnership with Conservation International and our coffee suppliers and farmers. Through the program, we engage and guide our coffee supply chain and invest in coffee growers, their communities, and long-term sustainable practices. McCafe SIP is currently active in 5 countries across Central and South America and reached over 6,000 farms in 2020. And coffee beans from the program are used to make McCafe coffee in the US. Cheers!
So I hope that was a nice little clip just to break things up, that, you know, some of the bigger companies now are taking sustainability seriously and looking out to help their diners and consumers to purchase more ethically. All right. So, all right, next up, I've got a little bit on animal welfare. So yeah, big challenges linked again to antibiotic use, what I mentioned on the first slide. I think the challenges we're facing now is because we're eating so much animal protein that on the supply side, we're seeing situations like this where animals are being grown in buildings, very sad, but also you see in places like North Carolina in the States or in Poland, Europe, these concentrated animal feeding operations, sometimes known as CAFOs, where animals are very, very intensively reared. And the challenge with that is that they're in confined spaces and really big, like lots of opportunities for them to get sick. Poor ventilation is very typical, and long periods without food or water. So really, really big challenges there as well. And we talked about antibiotic use already. The overuse of it is really starting to impact human health. And that can be a challenge if we're just going for surgery and we become resistant to a very important drug that we need. So I think one thing that you can look out for is supporting the 5 freedoms, and there are some standards out there for that. Or you could be asking your supplier about animal welfare when you purchase your meat. And these 5 freedoms are quite known in the animal welfare NGO space. So if the first one is freedom from hunger and thirst, from discomfort, pain, injury, or disease. They need to have the ability to express their normal behavior, so no pecking of other animals, and fear from distress. And of course, you can also look out for these standards or do more research around them. So you've got RSPCA, Red Tractor, CIWF in the UK have really great work around animal welfare as well. And of course, as per usual with anything that you're sourcing, is to visit your supplier. And this is a nice example here. What IKEA are doing is really getting involved with something called the Better Chicken Program. And this is a global program. You see them in action, very active in the UK, but also in this part of the world, New Zealand as well. And they really do take into consideration some of these factors that we've already discussed, whether it's on farm with the agriculture, the way they grow, or animal welfare, and also on the food safety side as well. So you can start to look out when you become conscious of these challenges that are kind of typical in the conventional meat growing space. You can start to look out for some of these standards. All right, this is my final one on looking at the focus areas in our framework. So the final one I'm going to talk about is local and seasonal sourcing. So quite often when we talk about sustainable food, you'll hear chefs and restaurants really promote local and seasonal. In Hong Kong in particular, we really have a lot of challenges around procuring local and seasonal food because the weather is so hot. And when you talk to chefs, typically say that they can only get local produce, really good local produce, from between around November to around March time. So this is really challenging. So when we talk about local seasonal, it's also important to take into consideration the context when you write your policies. So yeah, 95% is a lot of our food is imported here in Hong Kong, and Singapore has a similar challenge because of its makeup and the way where it is in the world. But one thing they do have, which is fantastic, is a policy called 30 by 30, where they are trying to become more sustaining in terms of growing their own food. And with what's happened with COVID and the pandemic, we've noticed that this, having a shorter supply chain can absolutely be beneficial for businesses as well. And if we're not sourcing locally and seasonally, what we're seeing is a depletion of local and heritage foods. So really important to think about that too. So in Hong Kong here, but also I'm sure in your own regions, you can start those relationships with your local farmers. So in Hong Kong, we talk a lot to farmhouse productions, but there are also organizations that can share fantastic growing calendars. And that's one way you can design or encourage your businesses, your F&B businesses, to think about seasonality, is to have that calendar, but also use it to educate your teams as well, so that they can then communicate with customers, which is how we then start to mainstream different ways to be more sustainable in our food and drink places. So having that relationship with suppliers is always great, talking about provenance. And you can also use this language on your menus as well. It's fantastic if you do that to help educate your members, to help educate your customers as well. So if I were to summarize just that procurement section of those three areas, I would say really do try to look out for those recognized standards if you can, and try to diversify foods on your menus and diversify diets for your customers so that you can support biodiversity, and consider putting these into your agreements as well. So it could be that you are a corporate and you will procure food for events. You might be able to put that into your policy to make that, put that onto your to your restaurants that you're procuring for lunches or evening events, and to put those kind of sustainability requests in there. Or your restaurants, you could also have an agreement with your suppliers on this, or encourage them at least to move in that direction, because it really isn't about saying, okay, I'm not going to use you anymore. It's like helping your suppliers to move along the sustainability journey with you. And keep doing research, because the research is also changing as well. All right. So I'm at this point going to pass it over to Val just to talk a little bit about the environmental challenges when we are operating in a food and drink space or a food service space. I'm going to just... let's see. Over to you, Val.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the environment part of our framework that is related to the food's direct and indirect impact on the environment in terms of footprint. So we're going to focus on one area here, but core issues include food waste, resource overuse, such as water, energy, and plastics. So for those of you who are in Hong Kong, we've all been to restaurants and we've all seen the enormous quantity of food that we get, and also packaging sometimes, like cutlery, plastic bags, straws. Asia actually generates the largest amount of municipal solid waste, with 1.6 billion tons of waste going to landfills every single year. And 40% of this waste is actually related to food. And it's not only landfill. WWF estimates that the equivalent of an entire garbage truck of plastic is dumped in the ocean every single minute. 56% of all this packaging that ends up in landfill, all this non-food waste, such as things I mentioned, plastic bags, cutlery, takeaway boxes, and single-use plastic, could actually have been readily recycled. And for those, once again, who are in Hong Kong, landfill in Hong Kong are reaching their full capacity right here. So what can you do? So today, emphasis is really placed on recycling, but that just really distracts us from the problem, the original problem, which is unnecessary production in the first place. Actually, when we talk about single-use packaging, only 10% of the plastic ends up being recycled, only 2% of which gets recycled back to its pure form. So reducing its source, reusing, and preventing should be the core focuses. And although they might not seem like the most business-friendly solution, they are actually the only way forward. So what can you do? Partnering with sustainable waste management and recycling facilities is a good way to minimize your impact. And when you need recycling, it's always better to partner up with waste management facilities. Also exploring initiatives to limit waste. If, for instance, if you're a business, if you're a food service provider, incentivizing customers, for instance, to bring their own lunchbox or their own shopping bags, boxes, coffee cups, or even cutlery. You can also explore things like promoting bulk purchasing. That can also help you overall reducing your waste before you even have to think about recycling. And then also make sure to work with your suppliers to use reusable or recyclable containers, for instance, when it's possible. But be very careful when you do that. Make sure that you are not paying more for biodegradable or eco-friendly packaging when they still end up in landfill. So make sure to communicate with your suppliers and make sure that they have the adequate facilities to break down those biodegradable or compostable packaging. So this is the main key takeaways from this short part on reducing, reusing, and recycling. So make sure to really prioritize reducing in the first place, reusing second, and then preventing as the most important. Secondly, make sure that if you go for more eco-friendly or like compostable, biodegradable packaging or items, make sure to communicate with their suppliers and make sure that there are adequate facilities to break them down so they don't end up as any other waste in landfills. And finally, explore alternatives. There's so many alternatives out there, and the research is changing all the time. There's a great example here on the screen from Notplow, which is a UK company that does actually edible packaging. So always worth to look out for new suppliers and different alternatives. So this is the end of my part on reducing, reusing, and recycling. We have another part on society that you can also check out on our website if you're interested in this part of our framework, which is more around staff and healthy eating. I'm going to pass it back to Heidi, and I think we have a question in the chat that Heidi asked you, so feel free to answer this question.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to ask you in the audience if you've tried any of these sustainability initiatives that we've discussed, or sort of maybe if you're in the early stage of your journey in your business, have you tried a food waste reduction initiative, whether that be in the back of house with your kitchen or in the front of house with your diners? Or how about trying to increase plant-based options or high animal welfare options? And how did it go? What challenges did you face? Be great to hear from you. And if you wanted to share some examples from your side. In the meantime, what I'll do is I will share a little bit more about how we help businesses to put all of this into practice, because it's no good just sort of having the knowledge and great that you're learning as a business what's going on, we need to find ways to action on what we've learned and to do it in a way that is manageable for the business. So we do have what we call our food sustainability sprint, and it's very much about starting with what and why. What is the challenge we're facing in the food system? Why do we need to deal with it urgently? Why now? Why not? Why not wait? And then once we understand what all those challenges are, I mean, we only talked about a couple environmental challenges here and a couple in procurement, but actually the system is much bigger. Once we understand that, then we can think about, well, what should we prioritize? What are the issues that are material to our business? So, for example, if you're a steakhouse, we won't be asking you to reduce your meat options, but rather increase the plant-based options and make sure that your meat options are high welfare and potentially, antibiotic free and all the rest in terms of sustainability. So helping you to understand and prioritize what's needed, but you can only do that once you know what all the issues are. And then the final part would be, the how. How do we take action? And that's when we run a sprint with you to figure out, if you don't have a strategy, we'll run a strategy sprint. And if you already have a strategy, how can we design an initiative that aligns with the strategy, whether you're a local, regional, or a global business, and to think about, okay, make sure we align, but also what would work in this region for your business, because we can't just throw all of our money behind a project if we don't really test it. So that's what a sprint's really good for. You can get some idea of what your customers would like in terms of new products or new initiatives before you actually go all out on it. And then that's when you can start to design better initiatives. If you potentially want to get audited for your investors, you can start to set KPIs and do some really exciting comms around it, or maybe even talk to the press. But we suggest you go through this phase, this flow, this process, in order to do a thorough job. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, do I really need to talk about food sustainability if I'm a food business, a drinks business? I would say absolutely, for sure. Your customers, those Gen Zs, will be asking you what you stand for in terms of sustainability. And here's an example of greenwashing, which is what you want to avoid. It's really greenwashing, if you've not heard of the term, is used to describe, deceptive marketing strategy. And quite often, actually, it's not deliberate, but actually in an unintended way, things happen, and that's how they transpire. So here's an example where I received a paper cup that says goodbye to millions of single-use plastic, but at the same time, I received a bottle of single-use water. So really contradictory and confusing for the consumer. So, helping you to align your different teams around what you really mean about sustainability. And if you want to understand, how to avoid this, you can look up the Green Claims Code, and they identify 6 areas in terms of what we mean by, being non-greenwashing. First one is very much about truthfulness and accuracy, clear and unambiguous. And this one's the tricky one, like not hiding important information is really important, or deliberately omitting important information. And then when you do your comparisons, like they're apples to apples. So you're being very, making sure that the comparisons are meaningful. And Val also mentioned this earlier on, is considering the life cycle of your product. So if you're going to spend 20% more on that compostable cup, have you checked that it's actually possible for you to break it down at a facility? Because if you're in your context, in your jurisdiction, you don't have the facility, then number one, you're paying more for no good reason. Number two, it's actually greenwashing your customers, because that will end up in the landfill anyway. And also 6, very important, is to be substantiated. Make sure that you can prove that claim, and that could be through a QR code or something like that. But you've got to have the facts behind it available in the public domain. So I've been talking about a food vision, and you might be wondering, actually, what does a food vision look like? What do you really mean? Let's have a look at what questions a food vision answers. So very much high level and quite strategic, but really, directly speaking, what's your goal? What do you want to do with this business? Why do you exist? Where are you going as a company? So really getting into those deep debates, because at the end of the day, you'll need a vision and mission to support, and be able to communicate to your customers what you really stand for. What does success look like for your organization? And what's the big picture? What is the end goal in terms of where you want to be as a food and drinks business? And really important and critical is how you're going to actually get there. So when we run a lot of projects, we think about the outcome first and work backwards, which is a nice way to do it. So thinking about the overarching focus of the company, if you're doing your strategy, or if it's an initiative you're running, then what's the overarching focus of the initiative? So there's 2 levels, and I'll show you a chart on that later on. And critical is what order will you do things, because sustainability is so broad. You can't do everything at once. So what will you do now, next, and later? And of course, to do that, you can run workshops that help you and your teams align around what's urgent and what's important for right now, what's a quick win versus a long-term project. Okay, so here are some examples that we like of what we mean by food visions. There's definitely no common sort of look and feel for a food vision. It's a strategy of a business, and they're all very different. But we like this example from Accor Hotel. What you'll see is very, very clear goal, and their 9 commitments. They have commitments around eliminating plastic, responsible tea and coffee, for example, but not just around what the commitments are. They also talk about how are they going to get there. So this is a nice example, and it's very simple, very clean, 9 areas, because you've got to ensure that your strategy or your vision is not fluffy and that it's actually actionable. Make sure that you can get it well understood by your internal teams and your customers externally as well. And this is more closer to home. Kin Food Halls, they talk about their commitment very publicly in terms of food sourcing, and they also have their values. So this is another one that we like from the UK, Azuri Group, a group of restaurants, quick service restaurants, and they have a very thorough sustainability report where they talk about what they've done, but also where they're going as well, with very clear purpose, and the goals are also very well defined, and the targets are very well defined as well. And you can see one here from a supermarket, and they talk about healthy and sustainable choices. They're very high level, very broad, but then they go into their pillars on how they are going to bring this to life. So I know we are almost out of time, so I'll just quickly run through how we design workshops. This is the AJ Smart graphic here, but really it's quite sort of a common method. We've seen this around. This is typically how workshops run. You start off, in this kind of pre-stage where you're preparing, you're bringing everyone together, collecting ideas, and then you get into this very sort of messy middle where lots of ideas are coming together. And then finally, the third stage is very much converging on your ideas and closing in and defining, getting that alignment and voting and closing it up. So we do have a system for our workshops, and you'll see in some of our testimonials that they're highly structured and they do get you to where you need to go. And we do follow the 4Cs framework as well, which I won't go into detail there, but they are very highly structured workshops. And I'll also just very quickly mention that the strategy sprint is a 4 to 5 day in-person or online event where we help you walk through your purpose. What are those guiding policies? What are those things that we need to be aware of to make sure that we're being realistic when we're designing our strategy sprint or our food vision? And then addressing straight on those challenges and things that could stop us from getting there as well. And whilst doing that, always considering who the team are, what infrastructure we have available, what are the capabilities if we were really going to execute on this strategy, and what are those services and products that we want to present to our customers as well. All right. And finally, if you're a business that already has some kind of vision, we do run sprints, which is these fantastic, very short interactive workshops to get teams to test out their hypotheses. So let's say you believe your customers will go for, you know, a 50% plant-based menu in your stores or in your restaurants, then you can run a test and a prototype. And this is just a very nice way of working through a campaign idea before you actually go full throttle on it. Okay, so actually, I think I'm going to end there because I want to give time for some questions. Oh, actually, I do want to share very quickly. If you found that really interesting, but potentially you're not quite ready to you know, get involved in terms of designing a food vision, we do have some short courses that can sort of inspire you and your teams to upskill in terms of food and climate change. And we're running a course in December on carbon literacy for food businesses. You can absolutely get involved, and we'll share the details in a moment. I think it's very critical that businesses are looking to currently help their employees get upskilled on the topic, and this is a very quick way for you to involve your teams. It's just 2 to 3 hours for 2 days on the 6th to 8th where we'll be running this, and it might be a nice way to get a taster of, you know, thinking about what your business can do in terms of climate change and making those pledges to reduce your carbon emissions. But that's also on a personal level and also on a workplace level. So do check out the carbon literacy for business course that we're running. And we're also, if you're in Hong Kong, would love to invite you to our launch of the carbon literacy project here, which will take place at Kin Food Hub. So they're not Kin Food Hall anymore, they're Kin Food Hub, and that's happening on the 5th of December. So do check it out. You can take a picture of the QR code or contact us on email at hello@futuregreen.global if you're interested in learning more. So I hope that was a nice sort of high-level overview, very quick. I know it's a lot of content, but you can always watch this back if you found it interesting, and give you a flavor of what we do here in terms of how we support food businesses in food sustainability. All right, so I think we've got we put the links in the chat as well for you to either sign up if you're here in Hong Kong or learn more about our training too. And also, as you can see along the green bar at the bottom, if you are interested to learn more, there's a QR code there, or you can just simply you know, follow me and the team on LinkedIn. That's my LinkedIn QR code. I'm just going to check. Luke, did we get any questions? It doesn't look like I could see any questions coming through. Maybe Val, you could just have a look on LinkedIn if there's anything, or on YouTube. I think with a lot of these webinars, we do share a ton of information, so it does get quite dense and there's a lot to absorb. So feel free absolutely to send us questions or just rewatch. Okay, so no questions right now. Is that right? Do we have any on your end? No, I think I've just overwhelmed you with a ton of content. I would say, you know, watch it again, have a look through some of the links that we've shared, and really take your time, because yeah, it can get a little bit overwhelming, but our job is to help make it a bit more accessible. So I think with that, if we don't have any questions, I'm gonna leave it there. And see you online.